James Riddle Hoffa in his prime. Head of America's most powerful labor union, the Teamsters. At the top, he controlled the trucking industry. But accusations of his connections with mobsters brought him down.
No violent action will take place against me.
And led to the final, fatal mistake that ended his life.
The fact that my father disappeared on that day, not knowing whatever happened to him, is probably the cruelest thing that could happen to anybody.
There's another Hoffa we know less about, beloved by his Teamster members and his family, who was pursued until his downfall by both John and Bobby Kennedy.
This afternoon, your complete indifference to the fact that
This demonstrates the police mentality and the police state thinking of John Kennedy.
Bobby Kennedy's hatred of Hoffa is not exaggerated one bit.
Did you say that SOB, I'll break his back?
Figure of his speech, I don't even know who I was talking about, and I don't know what you're talking about.
There couldn't be anything more starkly contrasting than the way Robert and John Kennedy were brought up and the way James Riddle Hoffa was brought up.
The way James Hoffa was brought up began in Brazil, Indiana on Valentine's Day in 1913. His Irish-American mother had to take in washing, and his Pennsylvania Dutch father was often away, but Jimmy's early life in the small town was still a happy and an active one.
There's a photograph of my Aunt Nancy, his sister Nancy, and my dad, and I chuckled because obviously he was having trouble standing still even at that time because he's rather blurred. And I thought it was kind of typical of him.
Times were tough in the coal mines where Jimmy's father worked, moving from mine to mine, operating a steam-powered drilling rig. His early death ended his son's formal education.
The dad died when Hoffa was 7 years old. Ultimately, he was forced to drop out to support his widowed mother and his 3 siblings.
Now, life changed dramatically. In 1924, the family moved to Detroit, where Jimmy would leave school after the 7th grade. Instead, he got a job as a stock boy in Frank and Cedar's department store. As the old cliche goes, Jimmy Hoffa got his education in the streets. Detroit was a tough industrial town where the young trucking industry was just beginning to grow. By 1930, Hoffa had a job unloading produce at the Kroger Company. The 32 cents an hour pay was only for time worked, and the hard-driving boss was called the little bastard by the men, but the Depression silenced any protest. When fresh strawberries came in one night, Hoffa and his friends saw their chance. They refused to unload the perishable produce unless things changed.
Strike lasted only a matter of hours, because we had planned it very carefully. And out of that strike became the organization of the Kroger employees, which are still in the Teamsters unions.
Hoffa had shown himself to be a born organizer. It now became his full-time work and led him to the woman he would marry.
My parents met on the picket line. My mother worked in a laundry. It was hot and very hard work. And at that point in time, the women were striking and they were picketing. And so he and his men came over to see what they could do.
They were losing their strike. We became involved in it, assisting them to win the strike. And out of the picket line, I became a very happily married man with 2 children.
Through this happy union came the birth of daughter Barbara and later son James. Hoffa's time away from home was spent in the rough, exhilarating work of union organizing. The 30s were hard days for labor. Workers trying to unionize were met at every turn by thugs hired by employers to discourage them. Detroit was known as a strong anti-union city, and Henry Ford alone was alleged to have an army of 5,000 men just to break strikes. The police were also on the other side and were never shy about attacking and arresting the organizers. For Hoffa, getting beaten up became just part of a day's work.
My mother told the story about having to clean him up and asking him not to go back to the picket line, and of course that didn't work. He'd go right back to the picket line and maybe get the other side of his head busted open and come back and have her patch it up.
Hoffa had shown himself to be a friend of the rank and file, a reputation which would help him immeasurably later on. But his early victories came at a cost that was also to stay with him. In 1941, in a vicious struggle with a rival union, local gangsters were called in by Hoffa for support. In Scarface Joe Bomarito and the fearsome Santo Perón. With this help, Hoffa's group won their fight, and Hoffa became the unquestioned leader of the Teamster Detroit Local 299. His journey to the top had begun.
He started out, this is in the late 30s and early 40s, they got a charter for Local 299, and that was the beginning on Trumbull Avenue. And from there, all the local unions of the Joint Council were put together, and he became the leader of that entire group. So right away, people started looking at him as a coming leader, that he had done so much in Detroit.
Within the next 6 years, Jimmy Hoffa would rise to the position of vice president of the International Teamsters. In the post-war trucking boom, Hoffa's control of driver contracts in the Midwest gave him the muscle to unionize more and more companies. Hoffa dreamed of one national labor contract between the Teamsters and the trucking companies that would improve the driver's lot and add to Teamster power. The 1955 merger of the two giant labor groups, the American Federation of Labor and the Council of Industrial Organizations, seemed to promise the end of union infighting. And the biggest union within the new AFL-CIO was the Teamsters. These were golden times for Jimmy Hoffa, as this dinner in his honor demonstrates.
This is a great night, honey. There'll never be another one like it. There's over 2,800 people here, and we should all be proud of this night.
I've always been proud of you, Daddy. I'm more proud of you tonight.
I don't know much about your business, Dad, but you're really great.
Hoffa contributed to the union's power through his ability to work with employers.
And I do not, and never will, surrender my right to argue and fight for my point in collective bargaining with the employers, but neither do I hesitate to recognize that the employers likewise have their own particular problems.
Teamster President Dave Beck, on the other hand, knew the union's power would bring problems.
Power is a great thing if it is not abused. And when we abuse power, then we lend emphasis to those that would destroy it.
Beck's warning foreshadowed perfectly the dark days to come. By the mid-1950s, the Teamsters was the largest and richest union in America, and its president Dave Beck and vice president Jimmy Hoffa were celebrities wherever they went. But some of the Teamsters' growth took place outside the law, and charges of racketeering were being raised.
Bunch of racketeering going on. They tried to move here in on us here at 46. We ain't standing still for them. We're out to fight them to the end.
Across America, the Teamsters came under attack.
And I consider the Beck and Hoffa disease far more dangerous and frightening than the Asiatic flu.
Kind of labor gangster fascism that is just as oppressive of civil liberties as anything that happened across the sea.
This fear of Teamster power made very real sense given the trucking industry's explosive growth. The cities were spilling over into the suburbs now, and more of what kept America going was moving by truck. The first major investigation into Teamster abuse came with the Senate hearings in 1955. Union President Dave Beck was called in by the chairman, Arkansas Senator John McClellan. His refusal to answer questions on the misuse of union funds opened the way for Jimmy Hoffa.
Mr. Hoffa, do you expect to succeed Dave Beck as president of the Teamsters Union?
I expect to run for president of Miami, and I'm very confident I will be elected in Miami, yes.
And indeed, at the Miami Convention in September of 1957, he was overwhelmingly elected president, in spite of, or some would say because of, bristling attacks of the chief legal counsel of the McClellan Committee and Hoffa's nemesis for the next 11 years, the young Robert F. Bobby Kennedy. Jimmy Hoffa was the star witness at these hearings. He was called back for 4 separate rounds of questioning, and each time he appeared, Bobby Kennedy would press hard on Hoffa's associations over the years with alleged mobsters who had ties to the union.
I do not intend to have the impression left that's been stated publicly that I'm controlled by gangsters. I am not controlled by them.
Television audiences were fascinated by the sorry group of such witnesses who were paraded before the camera. Men like Ohio Teamster and alleged jukebox racketeer William Presser. the intimidating Anthony Tony Duck Scorallo, so named for his ability to duck convictions, and Chicago local boss Joey Glimko, 36 arrests, 2 for murder.
I say you're not tough enough to get rid of these people, then.
Well, I don't propose to
You haven't moved
tough.
against any of them.
I don't propose to act tough, and I will follow the Constitution of the International Union.
Other witnesses included the talkative Barney Baker, mob strong-arm man and enforcer, Tony Provenzano of the Genovese crime family, and Indiana teamster Gus Zappas.
Did you ever make any statement similar to the fact that you were going to kill him?
No, sir. I may have called him a name or something, but I never said, I'll kill you.
There were also major crime figures like Johnny Dio Diaguardi and Paul Dorfman. Now the words teamster and gangster seemed interchangeable.
In the union, there are some people that have some connections, and he did know some people like that. They were not his friends, they were not his associates, they were not people he wanted to be with.
Now, I want to be able to follow the Constitution in due time.
Well, you can
This situation will be cleared up.
But in certain places, in Detroit, in northern New Jersey, he had inherited mob-controlled situations.
There is no question that individuals who somebody may have classed as a hoodlum, but he has not been proven as such, may have been involved in a question of negotiations with this union, and I may have come in contact with them at some social affair.
He couldn't come into an area where they were in control. If he had to get a better contract, he'd have to deal with who was on the ground.
And to his discredit, I guess we'd have to say, Hoffa went along with them.
Jimmy Hoffa himself never avoided the committee's questions through the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. He was more imaginative.
The Fifth Amendment.
I have no comment whatsoever on a man's right to take the Fifth Amendment, except the statements I
He
have
never
already
took the
made.
Fifth Amendment. He thought that if he did, it would be an admission of guilt, but he was sharp enough, he was very, very bright, to realize that he could achieve the same result by having other people take the Fifth Amendment.
I respectfully decline under the Fifth Amendment to answer that question on the grounds that it may tend to incriminate me.
I claim privilege under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, refuse to be a witness against myself. As I understand, you won't tell us anything about your operations down there. Is that correct? I claim my privilege under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution, refuse to be a witness against myself. That's what I thought. You have involved yourself in the number of witnesses whom you refer us who take the Fifth Amendment on what's happened to union funds. Whenever we ask them any question, they take the Fifth Amendment.
Stout denial was another. He would simply deny something, some charge.
How did you pay for them?
Cash.
You must have some of those bills.
I do not.
Could you turn some of those bills over to the committee?
I don't believe that I did.
Can you? Turn
I
over
said I don't believe that I did because I don't believe I have them.
Hoffa reserved a third weapon, but I think just for people named Kennedy, because he directed a very shriveling stare at both Bobby Kennedy and John F. Kennedy.
That you suggest that we're carrying on at the beginning a vendetta against Mr. Hoffa, and the point that I'm attempting to make is that he has involved himself. He keeps no record. His transactions are all in cash. He destroys bills. He refers us to his opposite partner in the transaction, and he takes the Fifth Amendment.
Your answers to Mr. Kennedy just don't make sense. You have to sit there and you have to recognize that your answers haven't made any sense because of my failure to recollect them. They don't make any sense anyway.
Well, Bob, how do you spell it? Victory or defeat?
Well, I think it went pretty well. We established some facts on Mr. Hoffa, and I think that those facts are enumerated in the summary that the chairman made at the end, and I think they're very important facts.
But in spite of Bobby Kennedy's best efforts, 2.5 years of hearings had left Hoffa not only still free, but still head of his powerful Teamsters. But one dramatic and concrete result of the hearings was the expulsion of the Teamsters from George Meany's giant labor group, the AFL-CIO.
In accordance with the power vested in it by Article 8, Section 7 of the Constitution, the Executive Council therefore directs that the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, Chauffeurs, Warehousemen, and Helpers of America shall stand immediately suspended from the AFL-CIO.
Well, I say to George Meany, and I've known George for a long time, and many of our fellows in New York know him from the day he started. I say that George ought to buy a full-length mirror And he ought to take off his stuffed shirt and take a good look at himself to determine whether or not he ought to join the employers or stay with organized labor.
Now, Hoffa's legal troubles were mounting fast. And yet, as in the McClellan hearings, he always seemed to get away. In New York in 1955, the jury deadlocked on a charge that he had once used an illegal wiretap to eavesdrop on his own Detroit headquarters. And Hoffa went on trial in Washington for bribing a lawyer on the McClellan Committee to act as a spy. Bobby Kennedy thought he'd put Hoffa away with this trial, but despite this secret FBI photograph of the alleged payoffs, Hoffa won the jury's sympathy and beat the rap.
I was not in doubt about the fact that I was telling the truth, that it would be listened to by the jury in language they understood. This could only bring about a verdict of not guilty.
During the trial, Bobby Kennedy made the statement that if Hoffa's acquitted, I'll jump off the Capitol dome. So after the acquittal, Edward Bennett Williams and my father got a parachute and they mailed it to him.
Bobby Kennedy's older brother John had served as a member of the McClellan Committee, and in 1960, this attractive young senator from Massachusetts hoped to ride his own reform record to the presidency.
Mr. Hoffa, Senator Kennedy has said you should stay out of politics, out of the 1960 elections. What's your response to that?
Only an arrogant millionaire playboy who does not understand the Constitution of the United States would make such a statement as he made.
I'm unable to go around the country debating all those who may be opposed to reform, particularly those like Mr. Hoffa, who do not come into this matter with clean hands and whose activities have smeared the reputation of his own union.
He was viewed as the little guy taking on the establishment and being pursued in a way that perhaps wasn't fair.
Mr. Hoffa, Senator Kennedy in the debate the other night made the comment that Jimmy Hoffa is still running around large and shouldn't be.
I'm not satisfied when I see men like Jimmy Hoffa in charge of the largest union in the United States, still free.
And certainly it is a disgrace to the millions of Americans who heard that program to have a senator of the United States say that an American citizen should not be allowed to be free when there is no pending indictments, no trials, and no charges against that individual. I don't believe that Senator John Kennedy is a proper candidate for President of the United States. He was unable during the emergency session of the Congress to get through any one single point of the Democratic plank. And if he couldn't negotiate with his own friends and colleagues, I don't know how he could negotiate with Khrushchev or some individual who was opposing this government.
After 8 years of Republican presidency, the country was ready for a change. In November, John Kennedy defeated Richard Nixon for the White House, but the margin of victory was one of the closest in history. The story was a completely different one a few months later in Miami, where Jimmy Hoffa was re-elected president of the Teamsters in a landslide. Since by this point, Hoffa had more than tripled both Teamster wages and the money his drivers made per mile, as well as vastly improving their benefits, his victory was never in doubt.
No one has ever had as much adulation from the rank and file, primarily because of the enormous bread and butter gains that Hoffa regularly delivered for them.
Johnny, we got a good pension plan, hospitalization. We all make a good living. We got the 40-hour week. Jimmy's got that for us.
But the further irony in all of that is that the employers, the trucking employers, who by definition had to pay for all of those very liberalized gains, were equally in Hoffa's cheering section, and they were so because they saw in Hoffa, above all, an intelligent, responsible ability to pay labor leader.
Hoffa spent as much time as he could spare from the job during these days at the cottage he had bought in the early 1940s on Lake Orion in rural Michigan. As these old home movies show, the 3-acre property about 40 miles north of his Detroit home was a perfect place to see his family. This was a side of Hoffa most Americans never knew. But 500 miles away from here, a new development promised that Jimmy Hoffa's fortunes would take a decided turn for the worse. In Washington, Robert Kennedy was named Attorney General by his brother, the President. Now Hoffa's longtime enemy would be the nation's top lawman.
Secure the best talent we could get for every position, regardless of party, regardless of any other factor. And I think that in every position, this test has been applied, and it's been applied in this case.
Bobby Kennedy, apparently, from all that is known, saw genuine evil in Hoffa, and saw in taking on Hoffa that he was taking on evil incarnate.
For his part, Hoffa saw Kennedy's pursuit of him as an obsession.
I remember him saying that he had a respect for Bob Kennedy. Perhaps the words I remember him saying is that Bobby Kennedy really knows how to hate.
As the new Attorney General, Robert Kennedy now had almost unlimited power to go after Jimmy Hoffa.
Robert F. Kennedy recruited 20 of the brightest and best young lawyers in America when he was Attorney General, and gave them exactly one charge, and that was to get Hoffa behind bars.
Mr. Hoffa, were you surprised to hear Mr. Katzenbach testify that there is what has been called a Teamster squad at the Justice Department?
Anybody who don't know that in your trade must be asleep. It's been there since the day Bobby Kennedy took office.
People were pulled before grand juries all over the country in this huge effort to try and destroy him.
Before long, Hoffa found himself in and out of courthouses in city after city, fighting charges on everything from mail fraud to illegal payments from a trucking company to jury tampering. And Bobby Kennedy's Get Hoffa squad was also combing all the union's pension fund investments and scrutinizing Hoffa's past tax returns. Hoffa's reputation reached a low point when he was charged with twice knocking down an older man in the Teamsters warehouse division.
When he hit me, I knew that I couldn't handle him, and no way.
In 1962, in what Bobby Kennedy was hoping would be a final blow, the grand jury indicted Hoffa on a case involving Sun Valley, a Florida land development to which Hoffa was accused of arranging an indirect loan of Teamster money because he had a financial stake in the development.
Jimmy, what about these lots? Are you a heavy owner in them or what? 4 lots, 70 by 100. That's less than an acre? That's right. Well, how much monetary value would there be in that? About $500.
But the more threats mounted from the outside, the more it seemed Hoffa could count on those within his union to cheer his fighting words.
Yes, I would have you believe, if you please, that you are the victim of fascism. You are the victim of corruption. You are the victim, if you please, of everything that's wrong. Yet I say to you that not one single instant has this international union faltered. Have we refused to carry on the fight? Have we refused to be intimidated, corrupt? And I say to you, as long as I am president of your international union, I will not stop fighting for wages, hours, and stability.
Then, in 1963, a more serious charge, that this labor leader so loved by his members had misused the huge union pension fund.
Ultimately, they will find that this is another propaganda scene of Mr. Robert Kennedy.
November 22nd, 1963. President John F. Kennedy had come to Dallas to unite Democrats in Texas and was assassinated. Inevitably, suspicion turned to the Kennedys' archenemy, Jimmy Hoffa.
Hoffa was quite friendly with Carlos Marcello, ranking Teamster in Louisiana. Marcello, according to some testimony, offered Hoffa the money to have Kennedy assassinated.
A different link between Jimmy Hoffa and the events in Dallas came from a Louisiana Teamster official.
Edward Grady Parton claimed and passed a lie detector test on this, that in fact Hoffa had sketched out a plan for killing, as it happens, not John F. Kennedy, but Bobby Kennedy, but with details which were amazingly similar to the events of November 22nd.
But in the bizarre turn of events after the assassination, when the alleged gunman Lee Harvey Oswald was shot by nightclub owner Jack Ruby, there lies an even stronger tie to Jimmy Hoffa.
One of Hoffa's closest friends, a genuinely big league mobster named Paul Red Dorfman had as his single partner Jack Ruby.
He's been shot.
It is also known that in the before November 22nd, 1963, Jack Ruby placed several calls to very high-ranking Teamsters. The one thing that is lacking is anything approaching meaningful proof. And you've got all of these little bits of evidence, widely believed, or in some of those cases, absolutely corroborated, but so what?
In 1964, Hoffa faced real problems when his long luck in escaping convictions finally ran out. Bobby Kennedy had won at last. There were 2 successful prosecutions on the jury tampering and on the Sun Valley development charges. Now, Hoffa could well find himself behind bars.
There is some rumblings now that the trials are over, that maybe you'll have to step down. It just isn't true, and there's a board meeting on the 19th to make that very definitely clear. Are you prepared to go to jail, sir? Mind your own business.
Just remember one single thing. This Teamsters Union is not Hoffa. This Teamsters Union is 1,700,000 families of working men and women in the United States.
Certain his appeals in higher courts would overturn his convictions, Hoffa remained defiant toward his bitter foe.
Why do you feel that Mr. Kennedy has seemed to have taken a personal interest in you, sir?
First of all, to promote his own personal ambitions, and secondly, because he is a spoiled brat.
And the now Senator Robert Kennedy was pursuing what was to be his last ambition, to become president.
I ask for your help. I ask for your assistance. I think that we can win in Chicago, and I think we can have a new day for the United States of America. Thank you very much.
Did Robert Kennedy strike you as a good candidate?
He wasn't a good attorney general. He, in all probability, a senator. I would hate to think what would happen if he became president of the United States. He'd probably have a fascist government.
Hoffa's cockiness didn't leave him after his convictions in 1964, in part because he was certain he could reverse them. But as time went on, it became clear that this was not going to happen. And by the end of 1966, all his appeals had been lost. Now, his dream of a national trucking contract still unfulfilled, Jimmy Hoffa faced his beloved Teamsters one last time before reporting to prison.
I cannot express with words my feeling that you, the members of the Teamsters Union, who know that I stand here as a convicted man at this moment,
but if an uninspiring old union colleague like Frank Fitzsimmons took over leadership of the Teamsters, Hoffa was sure he could remain in control of the union from behind the bars of his prison cell.
Hoffa decided on Fitzsimmons as his handpicked successor on exactly one ground, and that was demonstrated loyalty. Fitz was a very unimpressive guy in all ways. He was a terrible speaker. They used to say Fitz can empty a hall and nothing flat. He was described in such terms as tangle-tongued.
I don't think there's any individual human being that really understood Hoffa, lived with him, was as close to him as I was.
On the morning of March 7th, 1967, Jimmy Hoffa turned himself in at the United States Courthouse in Washington.
The government then put leg irons on him and a belly chain, and put him in a car, with a car in the front and a car in the back, a caravan, and then drove 100 miles an hour to Lewisburg like he was some type of desperado.
His overcoat covering his manacled hands, Hoffa walked into the Pennsylvania prison, where he would remain for nearly 5 years.
Prison was very difficult for my father. They put him in a maximum security prison, which to me was quite ridiculous because he was a man of position and power.
And he was confined to a small 8x10 cage. And he said that from time to time when he was working in there, prison officials and people from the Justice Department would come by and view him like he was in a zoo. And when he protested that, the warden told him that that was on orders from Bobby Kennedy, that he be kept that way, quote, for his own safety. This was the final grinding down by Bobby Kennedy of Hoffa.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
In 1968, during Hoffa's incarceration, Bobby Kennedy won the California primary. While thanking his supporters in a Los Angeles hotel, he was shot by an assassin's bullet and died early the next day.
There's a doctor in the house.
Hoffa's daily routine was unchanged by the death of his old enemy, Bobby Kennedy. Besides prison duties and family visits, Hoffa exercised, served as a prisoner advocate, and read the many books his daughter sent him. Meanwhile, Frank Fitzsimmons was enjoying all of the perks of his newfound power. Fitz took the Teamster tradition of supporting Republicans a step further, meeting with President Nixon and playing golf with prominent Republicans as well.
He became completely intoxicated with the job, and the one thing he didn't want was Jimmy Hoffa getting out of jail. He didn't want Jimmy Hoffa coming back, and he never wanted to leave that job. And that was the real problem that my father had, because instead of working to get my father out, Fitzsimmons worked to keep him in.
As I said before, I say it again, I am not Hoffa. Maybe my way of doing things is a little different.
Pressed by the Union membership, Fitzsimmons convinced Nixon to release Hoffa in 1971. But there was a very significant condition. Hoffa would have to stay out of the Union.
The condition was not on the papers that my father signed in the warden's office in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania.
My father told me that if he had known that, he would have fought those restrictions, because he felt that he would be out at least in another year on a normal parole. So he said, why would I take a restriction like that?
It's been suggested that President Nixon commuted this sentence as a political move, that he's looking for Teamster support to get reelected.
I don't know what went to the president's mind. Whatever it was, I appreciate it.
Jimmy, come on, Jimmy. Okay.
The grayer, more subdued Hoffa now faced a life without the Teamsters. He would never forgive Fitzsimmons for this.
To his dying day, from that point on, Hoffa was to say with enormous hatred, "There has never been a rat like this rat, Fitz."
Hoffa flew to St. Louis to spend his first free Christmas in 5 years with his family. His wife, Josephine, had long had heart problems, and just hours before Jimmy's arrival suffered a small seizure, but she recovered enough to greet her husband. Now Hoffa could meet the two grandsons born while he was away and get reacquainted with his granddaughter. If his future couldn't be with the Teamsters, he expected at least to share a long life with his family. But this was not to be. Jimmy Hoffa was now out of prison but barred from union activity. Instead, he turned his attention to prison reform and compared American conditions with the treatment of prisoners in the Vietnam War.
But I can tell you in the last year, there has been as many as 50 people in strip cells in the hole in Lewisburg. And there's some there right now, no later than last Friday night. Answer how that's possible in 1973, when we was arguing and proclaiming how bad the bamboo cages were.
Being the clever person he was, it gave him exposure. Plus, he truly believed that there was something that needed to be said, that this is what's going on in America's prisons.
Particular individual upon parole.
But Hoffa's main goal now was to remove the restriction barring him from the Teamsters.
I anticipate being able to get rid of the restriction, and then in 1974, when there is a election to be held in my home local union 299 in Detroit, to run for office there and then move forward from that position.
But some people, like Genovese crime family head Fat Tony Salerno, much preferred the Teamsters without Hoffa.
Hoffa was a very unpredictable guy. He could say no to the mob as well as yes to the mob. Fitzsimmons was a very compliant guy. He would only say yes to the mob. The Genovese family, which had gotten its hooks much more deeply into the Central States pension and health and welfare funds under Fitzsimmons than they ever had under Hoffa, decided that they did not want to take a chance of Hoffa coming back.
Fat Tony's threat didn't change Hoffa's characteristic fearlessness.
No violent action will take place against me.
The wild card in this new struggle was Hoffa's old colleague, Anthony Tony Provenzano, a member of the Genoveses who had had a bitter falling out with Hoffa in prison.
Anthony Provenzano, who was always a little wacky, had this idea that he was entitled to a Teamster pension.
Tony asked Hoffa to use his contacts and get him back his pension. Hoffa said no. He says, I'm in trouble enough. It's because of guys like you that I got into this kind of trouble in the first place. Forget it.
And he kept on bothering my father to the point where they came to blows, and my father punched him out.
Hoffa's old friend, Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone, now stepped in to broker a peace between the two men. Time was short. Provenzano had threatened to kill Jimmy Hoffa, and no one ignored a threat from Tony Pro. On July 30th, 1975, Hoffa drove alone to a suburban Detroit restaurant to meet Tony Jack, and waited.
Tony Giacalone never showed up. Hoffa phoned Josephine, his wife, at about 2:30, and said, where the hell is Tony Jack? He hasn't shown up. That was essentially the last ever heard from Hoffa.
Hoffa's Pontiac was found in the parking lot, empty, with no sign of what had happened to him. On her flight back to Detroit, his daughter Barbara had a premonition.
I laid my head against the window of the airplane, closed my eyes, and I could see my father in a dark shirt and dark pants, a short-sleeved shirt, and I could see him slumped over. And I knew at that time that I probably would never see him again.
The news was out at once, and with no word from Hoffa, his family had to assume the worst.
A loved one is gone, a man who's a dedicated family man. If there was in any way that he could have returned, he would have returned, and he's not here, and you couple that with the circumstances surrounding his disappearance, and it's obvious that he has been done violence of some sort. Well, he could still be. My father was the type of person that you just didn't imagine him being kidnapped. I mean, it just wasn't that type of person. He wasn't a docile person.
One suspect whom witnesses had placed at the scene of the crime had been part of Hoffa's own household. Charles Chucky O'Brien had moved in with the Hoffas in 1940, and O'Brien had long worked for Hoffa.
Hoffa was a very wary guy, very wary, careful guy, would not have entered a car, especially containing 3 lower-level hoods. If somebody like Chucky, with whom he still, as I say, maintained adequate relations, and who was, in fact, his foster son, had not been there at the wheel.
Chucky O'Brien cannot account for where he was that day. In fact, he gives a stumbling explanation of being in the area, driving a blood-stained car, whether it was fish blood or whatever. The car he was driving belonged to Tony Giacalone, or his son, and his activities are just most suspicious on that day. And when I confronted him, he ran out of the house.
There were still no leads. Then in December, Salvatore Sally Bugs Briguglio and his brother Gabriel, Teamster associates of Tony Pro in New Jersey, were fingered by government witnesses along with a third man, Thomas Andretta. Andretta's brother laid out an alibi.
Please let him finish his answer, will you?
First playing cards was Anthony Provenzano, Salvatore Briguglio, Thomas Andretta, my brother. Briguglio was in attendance in the room.
Mr. Briguglio, let me just ask you straight out. Did you kill Jimmy Hoffa, or did you have anything to do with it whatsoever?
No comment.
William Buffalino, Hoffa's old lawyer and friend, now defending the 3 accused, attacked the government.
They've branded and stigmatized, defamed and vilified the names of my clients by inferences and innuendos that were far-reaching. Government agents, by design, gave out government leaks by stating to the effect that they know who did it, and then pointed an accusing finger toward New Jersey. There's no question that they owe my clients in New Jersey an apology.
You know as much about the disappearance of James Hoffa as I do.
Do you have any idea what happened to Mr. Hoffa?
Absolutely none.
What was your relationship with Mr. Hoffa before?
My friend. He was my friend.
The Michigan office of the FBI had been involved in the case since shortly after Hoffa's disappearance, and the agency was certain the suspects were guilty, but that was not enough.
We believe we know who did it. There is, of course, a great deal of difference between knowing something and being able to prove it.
It takes dozens of file cabinets to contain the exhaustive detective work that was done, and the investigation remains officially open.
It is a matter of substantial investigative interest to us, and it has been the subject of substantial investigation in the past, and it's going to continue to be that in the future.
If they continue to point an accusing finger to the New Jersey area, they'll never find it because the people in New Jersey know absolutely nothing about this crime.
In the frenzied first days of the investigation, the key question, of course, was what had become of Hoffa. 29 acres in Pontiac, Michigan were dug up in just one of the searches for Hoffa's remains, but nothing was found, nor was anything found in searches in Florida or New Jersey. A 1989 article in Playboy magazine contained the intriguing suggestion that Hoffa was buried in the Meadowlands Stadium in New Jersey during its construction, and much of the public seems to believe this was what happened. But the most likely story is a different one.
Hoffa came into that automobile and was garroted or strangled. Even beyond that, the details get more gruesome. His body, by wide belief, again, it cannot be proven or disproven, was ground up in a trash compactor, and what was left was shipped in an oil drum across the country from Detroit to a mob-controlled, rat-infested 60-acre landfill right near the Pulaski Skyway in southern New Jersey, not far from New York City.
But for a long time, his Teamsters refused to give up hope that Hoffa was alive. It was a hope his family very much wanted to share.
We're trying to help, Dad, and we're going to find you. That's what I want him to know.
It is a mystery that may never be solved. Few lives have had as many contradictions as Jimmy Hoffa's, almost from his boyhood. Those who did not think him a devil spoke his name with great affection.
He's the type of fellow you can go up and say, "Hi, Jimmy," not Mr. Hoffa and all that. Even the drivers could go up to him and say, "Hi, Jimmy, how you doing?" And he knows you. You see, that's the thing of it. The man knows you.
I like my father's legacy to be that he gave all for the working people, that he gave 40 years of his life to the Teamsters, and that he had an undying love for the Teamster member, the truck driver, the warehouseman, the dockman. In our home, the worker was revered, and he always told us that those guys, that they're the ones we're fighting for.
It was all overshadowed by the sensationalism of mob involvement and very little recognition about his true dedication and his true abilities.
I express my thanks to all the Teamsters who sent me cards by the hundreds of thousands. They sent me letters in and kept in touch with my family.
In all American history, no labor leader has ever received that combination of applause, of adulation from the rank and file, combined from the employer community, as James R. Hoffa.
Thanks from the bottom of our heart.
James Riddle Hoffa. His middle name will always stand as much for who he was as how he disappeared.